To when? Here we
All
are.
right, well, welcome to gardening in the Surface Creek Valley, what do you call this particular
Gardening
scene?
in the gallery.
Gardening in the gallery. Welcome to Gardening in the Gallery. I'm Dia Jacobson. I'm the head of the Cedar Ridge Community Garden. In some way or another, I seem to keep that all in order. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, I've lived here in the Cedar Ridge area for 21 years and in Western Colorado for about 50 years. And I've been gardening since the early 70s. Got my Master Gardener certification in 2004. Something else about me is that my favorite book as a child was Secret Garden. So I've always had this thing for gardens, and in Secret Garden, garden was a place to go for healing. And so that's how I feel about gardening, besides the fact that I like to get my hands in the soil. To let you know a little about the Cedar Ridge Community Garden, it was started in 2009 with 12 members, and it was started by a group of people who had an interest in gardening that couldn't garden in their yards and on their personal properties. And so they got together, and most of them were involved with the town of Cedar Ridge Recreation Committee. These were the people who looked at culture and recreation in the community and spaces to do that. So this area became a focal point for a space for recreation, and community garden came up because a lot of the other recreational choices were a little bit too expensive at that point in time, but we weren't. And so we opened the community garden to all the citizens who live in the zip code 81213. And what you're seeing here is a picture of the major sponsors of the garden. We've always had support from GOCO in the form of a grant that comes from the county into the town of Cedar Ridge that is dedicated to the community garden, and the county commissioners every year will distribute the money that they get from GOCO to different public partnerships and so on. And then the USDA came in with some money to help us put in water lines and to put in our main path down the center of the garden. Rocky Mountain Ranches has donated seedling trees for us, heirloom trees, and they are being grafted at this point to be 100-year-old trees that were planted in the valley way back when people first settled here. And we now have grafts of 100-year-old trees that have been put in to the garden by Rocky Mountain Ranches by Bob Morris. Another sponsor is Living Waters and also Mile High Greenhouses. Every year they donate the plants that they have left over from sales for the people in the area, and we have a fundraiser and we sell those plants by donation, and it helps us pay our water bill and the different expenses that we have going forward with the garden. We also have had help from FFA, from the Rotary Club, and especially from the Western Colorado Community Foundation and now the Surface Creek Community Foundation that comes in with grants for us because they like the work that we do in providing what's called food security, places for people to garden to help enhance their diet and their access to healthy food. And then a lot of our surplus goes to the food bank. And so we've been working with the food bank and donations for many years. So let's have another slide here, and we can start seeing a few pictures. This is the entrance to the community garden, and you can keep going there with another slide. So welcome to the community garden. I would just love to have you come visit so you could physically do this. And let's go look for another one. So this is a food bank plot. We'll just stay here for a moment. And all the plants you see in the food bank plot were donated by either Living Waters or Mile High Greenhouse. Volunteers placed the plants in there. It's mostly tomatoes, peppers, there's a couple of cucumbers in there. And those will all be tended by volunteers, and then we will take them once or twice a week to the food bank and distribute them. The peak of the harvest really gets going in August, and will go until we're in freeze out at the end of the season in October. You can see the lines of the watering lines there and how the water is puddled around each plant. And this is for water conservation. We don't allow up in the air type sprinkling. We try to use soaker hoses mostly or ground level watering, and that's for water conservation. So part of the purpose of the garden is to enhance the knowledge that people have to conserve water. And so this is important in a place where water is at a minimum, and especially in this year where water is really at quite a minimum. So we prepare ourselves for this, and we've been using soaker hoses for a while. So let's go on and see what else we have here. This is a potato plot. So you can see the way the water line is snaking through there. And we learn as we go, a lot of us, as far as how to do these plantings. And potatoes are special, the way you have to dig a trench, plant the potatoes, and then you have to hill up. And so each plant has a little mound around it, and this continues through the season. This is a potato plot. And let's see something else here. These are two of our gardeners who've been with us for a while. They have a family garden, so they have two plots side by side. And they're growing a variety of vegetables, and you can see those posts set up, and in between those posts, which is difficult to see, there's strings, so that as the plants come up, they can train them up onto the strings and keep them up off the ground. And also, it's good for small space gardens. When you don't have a lot of room, you have things just grow around. And, you know, obviously you can see with the squashes, some of those have to stay down on the ground, but the rest of the plants are nicely trained upward. And I think there's another shot of this on there. You can change the slide, please. Okay, so there's another one. And let's go on. All right, so in this plot, you can see how the gardener has chosen to have a lot more space around their plantings. And that's pretty good, especially for this year. And then little trenches around so that the water can be filled up. And then the water will not be around, all around the garden. It keeps the weeds down. Another one, so we went through and just wanted you to see these different gardens. This garden has potatoes, it has greens, in the back there's tomatoes and peppers. Okay, and onward, and again. And we have a lot of pretty gardens in there, people who have nice taste in landscaping. Everybody has a 10 by 20 plot, and in the 10 by 20 plot, you are free to create whatever patterns you want of plantings, as long as we stay within the guidelines of keeping the garden relatively weed-free and doing water conservation measures as we water. And then here's another example of the little pools around which each plant is. And again, this really helps to get the water concentrated down into the roots of the plant. Another view, similar garden, a similar idea. And I wonder whose garden that is. Oh, yes. And again, another slide. This is a real minimalist garden. This gardener didn't really want to have a lot of responsibility, very busy person, but wanted to have a plot, was very much interested in a few tomatoes and peppers. And so this was his choice, and then we found a cucumber plant that we decided to add to it. And it's a kind of cucumber called an Armenian cucumber. They get really huge. And by the end of the season, that one plant will probably cover relatively half of that plot, or more. They do sprawl out, and they make cucumbers that are huge. They're called the art long. So, another. And the guy running the computer has this plot. And it's got a nice flower arrangement back there, and there's trellis to train up beans and tomatoes in the back, onions on the right. So a pretty garden. And another beautiful garden. You know whose that is.
Wow. This was my first experience with the community garden.
So that's another point to make up. Some of our gardeners have been in for, the entire duration since 2009, like myself and the others. And then others just come in and they learn and also bring their experiences into the garden and share those. So
And learning new experiences.
Yeah, we like to grow again, and we have one gardener with 2 children, and the children are down the garden often. I wish I had a picture of them to show you, so. And onward, another example of a lovely garden. In fact, that's
the children's.
The children
Yeah.
worked with, and then the parents. And that's
It's really fun to watch them.
this is a shared garden too, so that's yours truly, little moving. And just keep that under control. And you can see the hoses laid out here in my pattern. And then we'll be mulching mulching with peat moss. And so when we mulch, you won't see the hoses, they'll all be underneath that mulch. And go on and grind it again. And then up to the left, you can see an upright pipe, a white pipe, and that's where the main water supply comes in. And so when that is on, there's taps in front of each plot. And so not in front of every other plot, so we have access to water close by. We don't have to run hoses all over. Okay? This is a pumpkin patch, or a squash patch actually, growing on the top of what was a compost pile. And so that's something that Michael also put in there, okay? And these tubs were put in for people who are not able to get down onto the ground to garden. They can just stand up. You can even have a walker or any kind of a way to support themselves and just lean into their little garden plot there. So that's what those are for. And a couple of little specialty spots that we had in the garden that weren't being used, and this year that one was planted with beets and peppers. And this is a hoop house, and the hoop houses were put in last fall, and they were for what we call shoulder seasoning plantings, so that we could plant late into the fall and early in the spring, and even over the winter, some people are able to continue to keep their gardens going. And we do have year-round water in the garden, so we can do that. And this year we've been already taking bags of greens over, fresh greens over to the food bank, and they've come from the hoop houses.
Oh.
So there might be another shot of the hoop houses. It's just like a big bowl of salad. You just look at that and you pick what you want. And it's just fun to have these there. They enable year-round. Okay, so now it might be hard to see this, but this is a grafted apple tree. I think go on, maybe we'll find it a little closer up. So 2 years ago, the rootstock was planted, and then the rootstock had little trees that were eventually, after the roots were established, they were cut down. And on this one was grafted a Rome. There was a Rome, a Jonathan, and I think one of the older Standard Delicious are planted. And so let's see another one of those. As I'm looking at it, it's like a little baby. There it is. Yeah. So when they do this, we don't really get to watch them. You kind of know what they're doing. But anyway, we're hoping to have a small heritage orchard. And this is kind of a new thing that's been coming up all over the region. people are finding these old trees that have weathered through a century of climate changing, up and down temperatures, and those trees are still alive. And there are several preserved heirloom orchards in the state now, and there's one in Boulder where there actually were apple orchards in Boulder many years ago, and I think the university is involved in propagating those. So this is kind of a long view of the community garden here from the far end to the east, and what might be in the future for the community garden, things that we talk about, or bringing in bees, beehives. All this has to be done by volunteers, so we have wonderful ideas, but we also need people who will carry them out. Talked about putting in more trees. We have a large section of the garden that's still unused, maybe more hoop houses and so on. But essentially, this is a community garden. We're really happy for all the help we've had. And if you have any questions, is this the last slide?
No.
Oh yeah, the little bird houses.
Yeah,
Tell the
so-
story of that.
One year, we were interested in reducing the pest problem in the garden, so decided to put up bluebird houses. So one of the gardeners made a bunch of these and put them up, and now we have a lot more birds in attendance in the garden. And you can see them down in the plots in the early morning and in the evening, swooping down and helping us with pest control. And we have a shed full of tools. There's a couple of small tillers that we have. We also have behind that is a shredder. We have another large rototiller. Those are all kept locked in a shed, and we keep those serviced, and those are available for gardeners to use. A little seating area and a sink that Michael created this year to wash the produce, so that we don't have to take home vegetables, and when we're donating, we can take them directly from the garden to the food bank, nice and clean.
What about hoses? Do people need to bring their own?
No.
Silver hose?
No, hoses are all provided, unless there's something special that you like, and as well as all the hand tools we have, shovels and small hand tools and larger hand tools. Everything that most people need to garden, although some people will bring in special tools, but mostly we have everything we need. And we do ask gardeners if there's something special they like 2 years ago we got a broad fork, because there were a couple of gardeners that really felt like we needed to have a broad fork there, so we did. And we have a little picnic area where we can sit and have some social time. We have gardeners who like to bring food, and one gardener makes his own beer and brings that. And every now and then we'll sit around a picnic table and have a good time.
Have a beer.
And have a beer. And that's our trophy. And it's a moving trophy. Once a week, I wander around and decide which is my favorite garden of the week. And sometimes there's other people who give me a little feedback too. And we put our little trophy out there and let everybody know that we appreciate the beauty of their plots. Yeah.
How many people do you accept for plots?
Well, we have 22 active spaces to garden. Right now we have 18 members. 3 plots are dedicated to the food bank this year. One plot has been a construction zone that was used to put the sink in. So we have 18 this year, but we can have up to 24 people in the garden. And sometimes we even more if they want to share. And we also have some people who can, we have Kathleen as a gardener, and we can talk about, share our experiences with how we work together. If you have to be away and you need somebody to help you water, you can always ask another gardener. We do that for each other.
That's nice.
We help
Plots.
weed each other's plots, you know, whenever we can. We do kind of, it's kind of a family atmosphere there. And, you know, families can be a little chaotic sometimes, functional, dysfunctional, you know, we work on that, working together is a fun challenge. And those of us who really love gardening love to share little tips about it, so we do have a lot of sharing.
Dia, how are the hoop houses? Who are they accessible to?
The
Are they
hoop houses,
designated?
right, so we have 4 hoop houses, and we rent them out just like we rent out plots. And they're on a first come, first served basis.
So someone might have a plot and a hoop house.
They can have a plot and a hoop house, they could just have a hoop house if they wanted.
Okay.
And that's all new for this year. Right now, the only people that have hoop houses are members who also have regular plots. You know, but that's just the way that worked out. As it goes on, we could actually have a person that says, I don't want to garden in a regular plot, it's too much room for me. I just want to take a hoop house, and we price that accordingly. A regular plot in this season was $35, and that's for the whole season, and that includes water and all the amendments that we buy, and the use of the tools and so on. The hoop houses we rented out for $20, and then we had some that were divided, so a gardener could say, you know, I'm going to use this half $10, and so we were able to do that. You have to manage the hoop houses, especially in the windy weather, and when we know we're going to have cold nights and warm days. We'll warm it up and we'll close them down at night. So it is something that, you know, you can't just leave. So when you're managing a hoop house, that's for a gardener who's going to have the time and is going to be around.
And for those people that don't know where it is, could you tell us how to get to it?
Where it is, it's behind the food town. So you go down like you're going to the shelter shop, or like you're going to the skate park. We're on the left side and the shelter shop is on the right. The creek is just down below. Thanks for asking that. Where is it anyway?
And people can just go and look and,
Yes, you can go and look through if the gate is open, you can come in. No dogs are allowed. But if there are people in the garden, the gate is unlocked. You can come in and look around. It is the town of Cedar Edge's property. We do lock it when we're not there, when nobody's there. We make sure all the water is turned off, and we lock the gate because we have tools and we have equipment. And we also have vegetables, and we certainly don't need people coming in and helping themselves. That is not the purpose of the community garden at this point. We don't have a community garden that people can just come in and get.
Wow, and the deer would have a wonderful time.
Wouldn't
They would walk right through that open gate.
Yeah, well, that's one of the big assets of the garden, and a lot of people have a hard time gardening because of the deer.
Because of
And
the
so we
deer.
do have deer fence, and
Right.
so we're very well protected there. Yeah.
and this may be a weird question, but if someone wanted to help with the community garden but didn't necessarily want a plot, would they have access to those vegetables in the community area?
You mean the food bank?
The
section?
food bank, yeah, I guess. So the plots that aren't individual or personal plots,
Uh-huh.
that's for the food bank?
Yes, those are for the food bank.
Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is, say I wanted to come and volunteer for the food bank, could I also have some of those vegetables?
No, that's not the way it's set.
Okay.
No, you would, if you became a member and, maybe just had a tub or a part of a hoop house or something. I would like to explore that
That's a good question.
with other members. It's a really good question because I've thought about that in the past. That if we could charge a membership fee for just, a small membership fee for helpers, and then have you sign what we call a hold harmless form, because everybody who becomes a member has to do that. We have insurance, and because we are town property, to indemnify the garden and the town against injuries. So you'd have to kind of go through those hoops. But if you wanted to just come in as a volunteer, and you knew somebody who was a member, you know, that probably would be fine. That would be great. You know, you would enjoy having people that wanted to come in and help, especially when we do harvest in the food bank.
Yeah.
So that's something we could, I'm sure we could negotiate pretty easily. Want to help? Absolutely. Hey, how about some meeting? Let me see my notes here if there was anything. You know, one of the things I wanted to mention too is that during the pandemic, it was a great place to have the garden. It was a place where that many people who weren't around other people could go and just feel safe and nurtured by their garden. There's just something very healing about working in the garden and being out in the fresh air. And so there were several gardeners who actually mentioned that to me, that they were so glad to have the garden, especially during last season when everything was pretty much shut down and we really didn't have a whole lot of access to other public activities. And speaking to other gardeners, you know, respecting the social distancing and so on. And we would have some social time. So that was
Gardening satisfies the emotional piece of life too, to just get quiet, to be and work in the soil.
right. There are so many books now coming out about gardening and the whole spiritual concept of gardening. My sister, who's a kind of a horticultural therapist and works with aromatherapy and different types of things that you grow in different settings for people who are interested in healing, growing different types of balms and so on, sent me a book about, it's called Your Mind on Gardening. And it's about the meditative benefits of working in a garden. The things that you run into, the fact that you change your concept of time, you know, how long does it take a bean to sprout as opposed to a squash, as opposed to a carrot, you know, and you just begin observing these small things that are happening in this life that you're nurturing and bringing along, and then there you have food to either eat yourself or share. It's just, I don't know, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Something I've just been fascinated with since I was a child. So, any other questions?
You've got a squash.
Oh, yes. So there's a little butternut squash.
Yeah.
coming up.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, it's a little baby. And there's some beans winding their way up the poles. And there's peas. Snap peas, I think.
Nice.
Still there. There's a grapevine.
There's the
We
great.
did allow one gardener who really promised he was going to be with us forever and ever because we discourage plantings that, you know, if people come into your garden and you know, we try to have the gardens cleaned out. But he has stayed there. Swiss chard, lovely flowers. It's always wonderful to bring
beautiful.
bees in. So having flowers is a great enhancement for pollination. A few more flowers. And there's a nice long distance shot of the hoop houses. You can see 1, 2, and then there's 2 behind it. One has the hoop down. And the sunsets of the garden are particularly nice. Yeah, and another long view. And you can see we're really kind of coming up into production. In another month, it's just going to be, you know, unbelievably lush.
So Dina, you always have future plans. So what's next on the improvement plans or the future plans?
It really, a lot of it depends on how much money we have,
Right.
you know, number one. But our future plans, we're considering, you know, like I said, beehives, putting in more hoop houses. I think there's also been some conversation about berries, putting berries in, out where the apple trees are, and turning that section of the garden into a little bit more of a perennial and permanent plantings area. When we started the garden, we only had this main area where all of the plots are. Larry Claxton, who was the first project manager and really got things underway at the garden, would come in and negotiate with the town. And then over a period of years, we acquired the 2 more sections. However, what held us back up until about 2 years ago was the fact that we didn't have enough water and access to water to use those other 2 sections for production. We had enough water for our plots. We had enough water to run the garden from April to October. And then we had to turn that off because our water lines were all shallow. Well, then the town improved the water lines. We got a new tap from the town. I got a grant from the USDA. We were able to put in 6-foot deep water lines, and now we have year-round water. So that's a game changer.
Nice.
So that's why we're able to look at increasing the amount of trees. Because when we had the trees at first, we were carrying buckets out to them, or running a long hose from the main part of the garden. Well, now we have taps right out there, and they're all attached to our new water line. So now that we have that, we can be in a position to, and we don't want to raise the fees too much. So that means we have to go out looking for money. And the Community Foundation has been a real boom. But so has the MEA and the Rotary, and some of our individual members have made some extra donations to the garden. So it's money driven, it's volunteer driven. We don't have a paid staff person. There's nobody who gets a salary. So we're limited by that too. There's only so much. And then sometimes you have extremely hard-working volunteers like the one sitting at the computer right now.
Yes.
A couple of others that really go out of their way. The couple that you saw in the picture previously who were working in their garden, they're the ones who built the hoop houses. They live in the neighborhood just down the block from where we are, and they have hoop houses in their backyard. And so I went over there and I said, why can't we have these in the garden? And we had just gotten a grant from the Community Foundation. And so we figured out what we would need and made a list and bought the plastic and the wood. And that Community Foundation grant paid for all of that. And so that's how that came to be. So the future of the garden really depends on, the people who become members and what they'd like to do.
But I think we should acknowledge, even though we don't have a big audience, that without your leadership, none of this would happen. Really.
Well, that would be taking a little too much credit.
No, it is not, because I've known you for years.
I don't think so. I am very thankful for this community, for the town of Seabright for giving us this land, and I'm really grateful for the zeal of my fellow gardeners who come in and keep this going. And I really never planned to be the head of the community garden. I started out as a checkbook holder, and I just wanted to do something. But gradually things changed, and when Larry turned 80, he just pretty much handed the garden back over to the rest of us and said, bye, I'm going fishing. We've done a lot of work, 10, 11 seasons, and now we're on season 13.
Wow.
So we hope to keep going and providing space and places to grow food and enjoy fresh air and sunshine to the people of the Surface Creek Valley. Thank you.
Great, thank
Thank you.
you.